A blizzard raged across the Wyoming frontier when a desperate Apache woman collapsed on a widowed rancher's doorstep. He meant only to save her life, but the danger following her, and the bond growing between them, would change his Christmas forever. Let's get started. The wind roared across the Wyoming frontier like a wounded beast, rattling the shutters and forcing snow against the cabin walls. Calder Brooks had spent enough winters alone to know that storms like this were merciless, swallowing travelers, livestock, and hope without hesitation. He added one last log to the fire, praying it would last the night. The blizzard outside cried like a chorus of ghosts. Carrying memories, he rarely allowed himself to face his wife's last breath, Annie's tiny cry in the cradle, and the countless silent nights that had followed. Christmas Eve meant little to a widower. Survival was the only ritual he honored now. Just as he settled into his chair, a sudden thud shook the front door hard enough to rattle the hinges. Calder stiffened, hand instinctively drifting toward the rifle mounted above the mantel. Only a fool or a dying soul would be out in this hellish storm. And fools rarely knocked. Cautiously, he opened the door only a crack, letting a sharp burst of freezing air slam into his face. The lantern light illuminated a figure collapsing forward. Young Apache woman, soaked, shivering violently, snow tangled in her dark braids. She fell against his boots before he could even speak. Her skin had taken a bluish hue, the kind that signaled danger beyond mere cold. Calder didn't think twice. He swept her into his arms, pushing the door shut with his shoulder as the storm howled behind him. Snowflakes scattered across the wooden floor, melting into tiny puddles around their feet. Little Annie peeked from behind the table, clutching her rag doll tightly. Her brown eyes widened as Calder carried the woman to the fireside, placing her carefully on the rug. "Papa, is she dead?" she whispered. Calder shook his head, though he wasn't entirely sure. He worked quickly, stripping the woman's soaked outer layers, wrapping her in thick wool blankets he normally saved for the coldest nights. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, her breath shallow and uneven. Calder prayed he wasn't too late. Hypothermia had taken stronger people in far gentler winters. The woman's eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused. Her lips trembled as she fought for words. Calder leaned close, trying to catch the faint whisper that escaped her. "I need a shelter." The plea was soft, fragile, and heavy with exhaustion. Then her eyes slipped shut again. Calder nodded even though she could no longer see him. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice lower than the wind outside. "You'll stay here tonight." He tucked the blankets tighter around her shoulders, trying to trap in the meager warmth the fire provided. Annie knelt beside her gently, touching the woman's hand. The Apache woman's palm was ice cold, and Annie flinched before bravely taking it again. "Papa, she's freezing." Calder nodded grimly. He lifted the kettle from the stove and poured warm water into a tin cup. "Hold this," he told his daughter gently. Let her feel the warmth. As Annie pressed the cup between the woman's hands, Calder rubbed her arms briskly, trying to coax life back into her limbs. He had seen frostbite before on ranch hands, travelers, and once on a child who didn't survive. He wasn't ready to see it again, not tonight. Not in his home. Outside, the wind slammed against the door with renewed fury, rattling the frame. Calder knew that if she'd been caught out there another 10 minutes, the storm would have claimed her. "What were you doing out in this weather?" he muttered to himself, though he knew she couldn't answer. Whatever drove her out of safety must have been worse than the storm itself. Annie settled beside the woman, placing her little blanket over her legs. Calder watched the gesture, warmth stirring in his chest. His daughter had her mother's kindness, soft, instinctive, and brave even when frightened. "She needs us," Annie said simply. Calder nodded. "Yes, she does." Slowly, color began returning to the woman's cheeks. Her breathing steadied, her shivering eased. Calder took a deep breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Life had returned to her body, even if only a flicker. It was enough. Hope often began as a flicker in this unforgiving land. The fire crackled louder as if cheering its victory over the cold. Calder leaned back, exhaustion pulling at him. Nights like this reminded him how thin the line was between life and death on the frontier. No one survived alone. Not even a hardened rancher who pretended otherwise. He studied the woman more closely now that she wasn't dying before his eyes. Her face was delicate but strong, high cheekbones dusted with frost, a thin scar running along her jaw. Her clothing was travel-worn, torn in places. She hadn't been wandering aimlessly, she'd been fleeing something. Calder's jaw tightened. The West was filled with dangers, outlaws, drunken settlers, soldiers, rival tribes. Whatever chased her must have been relentless. He wondered if they were still out there, in the swirling snow, hunting her even now. He reached instinctively for his rifle again, reassuring himself it remained within reach. The woman stirred, mumbling something in a language Calder didn't understand. Annie leaned in, curious. "Papa, is she dreaming?" He nodded. "Yes, and she's been through something terrible." Annie frowned sadly, brushing a damp strand of hair from the woman's forehead. "We'll help her, right?" Calder hesitated only a second. "Yes," he whispered. "We will." Hours passed as the storm battered the cabin. Calder kept the fire alive, feeding it log after log, refusing to let its warmth falter. The woman's breathing grew steadier, her body relaxing as the fever of cold began to release its grip. Calder sat near her, watching for any sign of danger. Annie eventually fell asleep beside the woman, curled up like a tiny guardian. Calder placed a quilt over both of them, a soft smile tugging at him despite the storm outside. Christmas Eve, he thought. Maybe some miracles still existed in this world. Maybe not the grand kind, but the quiet, human kind. The storm showed no mercy, but the cabin became a sanctuary of heat and flickering light. Calder stared into the flames, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The woman's arrival felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name, but could feel in the quiet ache of his chest. The woman's eyelids fluttered again, her brow furrowing as she fought consciousness. Calder leaned forward. Her voice was barely audible, but he caught one trembling word, "Please," and then she slipped back into silence. Calder gently placed a hand over hers. "Rest, you're safe. No harm will come to you here." He meant it, though he did not know. Her story, he knew suffering when he saw it, and he would not turn a wounded soul back into the frozen night. The storm could rage, the world could judge, but inside this cabin, compassion would stand guard. The night dragged on, the storm never easing. Calder stayed awake, pacing, checking the fire, checking the woman, listening for anything beyond the walls. He felt responsible for her now, not just out of duty, but out of something deeper, a feeling he had not allowed himself in years. Finally, near dawn, the blizzard's roar softened. The storm was losing strength. Calder walked to the window, seeing only white drifts and silence. The woman had survived the worst of it. But storms had a way of lurking inside people too. Long after the snow melted. He returned to her side, sitting quietly as she slept. Annie shifted in her dream, leaning closer to the woman's arm. Calder exhaled softly. Maybe fate had brought this stranger to his door. Maybe fate had decided he and his little girl needed her just as much as she needed shelter. And as the first faint light of Christmas morning seeped through the frosted window, Calder realized this night would be remembered not for the storm outside, but for the life that had been saved inside his home. The dawn arrived heavy and pale, the storm still clawing against the cabin walls as if unwilling to release its grip. Onatah woke slowly, opening her eyes to the soft glow of the hearth and the smell of strong coffee simmering nearby. For a moment she looked confused, as if unsure whether she had survived the night. Calder noticed her stir and moved slowly so he wouldn't startle her. He poured a cup of warm broth, not coffee. He wasn't sure how long she had gone without food. When he handed it to her, his rough voice softened. "Drink, it'll help." Onatah accepted the cup with trembling fingers. Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the old pine furniture, the blankets, the fire, the child sleeping beside her. Safety, a fragile, unfamiliar thing. She bowed her head slightly, murmuring a soft, "Thank you," her voice raspy from cold and exhaustion. Annie woke next, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Onatah awake, she smiled warmly and scooted closer, placing her tiny hands in Onatah's palms. The Apache woman hesitated only a moment before gently holding them, warming them with her own. Calder watched them, something easing quietly in his chest asterisk, but behind the gentle gratitude in Onatah's eyes, there was a flicker fear so deep it seemed carved into her bones. Calder saw it. And though he had questions, he did not ask them. A wounded animal bolted when cornered. A wounded soul needed space asterisk. The storm continued its relentless assault. The world beyond the cabin buried under drifts of white. Calder knew they were isolated for at least another day, maybe more. He didn't mind. For the first time in a long while. The cabin didn't feel quite so empty asterisk. Onatah finished the broth slowly, savoring each sip as if she didn't fully trust it to be real. She looked toward the window, flinching when the wind screamed. Calder caught the reaction. Something about storms frightened her more than they should have. Something or someone had driven her into it asterisk. Annie began talking softly, showing Onatah her doll, placing it gently in her lap. The Apache woman gave a small, timid smile. It was the first time Calder had seen warmth in her eyes instead of fear. She likes you, Calder said quietly. Annie's never this quick with strangers asterisk. Onatah looked at him, the faint smile fading into something more serious. Not stranger long, she said slowly, her English careful but clear. Calder felt a strange pull inside him, respect, sorrow, curiosity all tangled together. She was trying to trust him. Trying to trust safety again asterisk. Hours passed. Calder tended the fire, mended a broken latch, sharpened his knife-awl while keeping Onatah in the corner of his eye. She moved carefully as if expecting punishment for every step. She folded the blankets neatly, helped Annie sweep a corner of the room, and always looked over her shoulder asterisk. Finally, Calder spoke gently. You don't owe me labor, he said. You're a guest? Rest? Onatah froze, her hands tightening on the broom. In my world, she whispered, rest gets taken. Calder felt those words like a blow. Her fear was not born from winter, it was born from men asterisk. Eventually, she sat near the fire again, staring into the flames with eyes full of memories she could not escape. Calder knelt beside her. Onatah, he said carefully, who were you running from? She didn't answer at first. The storm outside growled. Then she took a trembling breath. Men, soldiers. 2 days behind asterisk, the air in the cabin tightened. Calder's jaw clenched. Soldiers out here meant danger, especially for a native woman traveling alone. Annie looked between them, sensing the shift. Calder pulled another log from the pile, tossing it into the fire as if feeding his own rising anger. You're safe now, he said asterisk. Onatah shook her head slowly. No safe, not for me. They take women. Use them. Sell them. I run. They follow. Calder's fists curled at his sides. There were monsters in the Old West, and many of them wore uniforms. He looked at Annie, then back at Onatah, the decision forming inside him like steel asterisk. You'll stay here, he said firmly. As long as you need. No one'll touch you. Onatah looked at him as if she didn't understand. Why help me? She whispered. Calder swallowed. His voice came low and honest. Because I know what it is to lose everything. And because no one should face evil alone asterisk. Onatah lowered her gaze, tears pooling in her eyes, silent, heavy, unexpected. Annie crawled into her lap, wiping them gently with childish certainty. Papa keeps us safe, she said. He'll keep you safe too. Onatah closed her eyes, letting the child's tiny arms wrap around her. It was the first embrace she had received in years asterisk. The storm began to fade by afternoon, the wind weakening, the snow settling into heavy silence. Calder stepped outside to check the land, rifle slung across his back. Drifts reached his knees. The world looked peaceful, too peaceful for the danger that shadowed their cabin asterisk when he returned. Onatah stood near the table, looking stronger, more grounded. She met his eyes without flinching. If they find me, they hurt you, she said softly. Calder shook his head. Let them try. There was no bravado in his tone, only conviction. Onatah recognized it. She had grown up around warriors. She knew the sound asterisk as night fell. The storm finally surrendered, leaving a quiet so deep it felt sacred. The cabin glowed warm against the frozen world. Calder sat across from Onatah, the fire painting soft gold over her face. Annie slept soundly in her lap, trusting without fear. The sight stirred something in Calder that he hadn't felt since his wife died. Onatah looked down at Annie, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "She has gentle heart," she said. Calder nodded. Her mother had one too. A silence fell, but it wasn't heavy, it was healing. Onatah lifted her eyes. "You save me," she murmured. "Not just body? Spirit too?" Calder didn't know how to answer. He stared into the fire, feeling warmth settle in a part of him long frozen. Onatah's presence wasn't just survival, it was a quiet return of life to a home that had gone too long without laughter, without hope, without a woman's courage. As the final embers glowed, Onatah whispered something he almost missed. "Storm inside me, quieter now." Calder looked at her, realizing this was more than refuge. This was fate placing two broken souls beneath one roof. He gave a slow nod. "Storm's quieter for me too." Outside, the moon lifted over Wyoming's white plains, shining on a land still wild, still dangerous, and yet, inside one small cabin, life had shifted. A bond had begun, quiet, fragile, real. And for the first time in years, Calder Brooks felt that Christmas had brought him a blessing, one he never expected, and one he would fight to protect with everything he had.